Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education, a podcast that focuses on what is happening in education today, connecting everyone to the movers and shakers that are breaking boundaries in the education arena.
Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education. So surprise, surprise, we have another AI episode, but this one's going to be a little different. We're going to get to hear exactly what schools are asking for and maybe not what they're asking for, but what they really need. And I'm looking forward to hearing about this today.
Yeah, so our guest today is Adam Garry. He's an educator, but then he went to work for Dell and he was leading the way with innovation and all things education. While he was there, I think Adam had kind of a crystal ball. He was seeing the future, what's going to happen, knew that AI was going to be big. And so he stepped away to go out and really support each school district that asked him to be part of their process. And today we're going to get to hear about the learnings that he had and how he pulls districts through this process step by step. So, Adam, we are pleased to have you here today with us, and welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education.
Happy to be here.
Great.
Yes, and you certainly are breaking boundaries. You're in a whole new world of education right now. So tell us a little bit why you decided to step into this world.
Well, I think part of it was the first time I put my hands on ChatGPT and just saw what happened. My brain just went 1,000 different directions for all the work that we could be doing to help students with learning, help school districts with operations, help district leaders get back some of that time they so desperately need. But above and beyond that, a lot of the work that I'd been doing for years was on personalized learning, trying to get that to scale. At one point we thought the LMS would help us with that, and it didn't.
No.
And, I saw so many more possibilities that this technology could support. And so right away, just went out to some districts that I had worked with for a number of years and said, let's do this together. Let's work on this and work to fail and learn together. And I had that opportunity. So it was great.
Yeah.
And the great thing about it is we really have the pedagogy down for personalized learning. We've been talking about it for many, many years. We just couldn't figure out how to make it happen. One person just couldn't make it happen in a classroom.
Well, it can happen, but not when standardized testing is in the way, because there isn't a match. There isn't a match between the two. But with AI, it could certainly be successful for sure. That we have that a personal assistant for each student in that case, which is quite amazing.
Adam, when you arrive at a school district, tell us what happens. Who do you talk to first, and how do you start to make things happen for the district?
Yeah. So I decided to do my work at the cabinet level, and then also with, executive directors and directors to kind of support that work that needs to be done at the district, so that when we roll this out to the teachers and the school leaders, they have the things in place that they need. And they also have folks that understand the technology and where it's going, so that they can get the things that they need as they ask for them as we push this thing forward. And so I try to really get all that work done at that district level, so that, we can be successful at the student, teacher, and lead.
So what are districts actually asking for? What is it that they're asking for? Are they asking the right questions? Do you tend to, guide them in a way that suits their needs best? Is it based on what the states are actually? I know there's state guidance, not a lot. I think 9 or 10 or 11, a dozen maybe states that have guidance. How does that all come into play?
Wow. So there's multiple things there. So let me try to tackle some of that, and then I'll jump into some of the work, how we start the work off as well. So they don't know what to ask for, to be honest, and that's not their fault. This is an emerging technology. Right. And even leaving the AIR conference, like, something that was clear to me prior, but was very clear to me is, the reality is that this isn't a thing where we can go out and say, hey, let's get some feedback. Or what do you need, teacher? What do you need, school leader? Like, they're not educated enough yet to
Yeah.
know, what they need. We do need to build that into the process. Don't get me wrong, but starting there is just not the right.
Yeah.
That's first. Second, the guidance documents are great, and I'm glad states are doing it. However, they don't translate at that district level from
Okay.
from guidance to operationalizing. School systems have a number of different initiatives and things that they're working on now, whether it's, teacher recruitment, because we don't have teachers, classrooms, health and wellness,
Yeah.
students and the
Mhm.
teachers, the list, right? Learning loss.
Right.
Right.
And so generative AI, as powerful as we think it is, because we're kind of engrossed in it, it's the top of the list right now, unless someone isn't standing in front of them that can
Yeah.
help them and support them. So as I kind of viewed that, what I'm doing is I'm kind of coming in and giving them the roadmap, but then I allow them obviously to localize everything that I do. So the only day that is very much dominated by like facilitated presentation, and one of my design principles is that I don't talk for more than 15 minutes at any given time.
Yeah.
Is
Like that.
is day one. All the other days are working days that I've kind of organized, and hear a little bit about that. But day one really is risks and possibilities. So you're starting with
Mhm.
superintendent and cabinet for half the day, maybe the other half the day you get to your executive directors and directors. And, the two things that they are responsible for that day is being curious. I tell them will be their superpower for the rest of their time as educators, these tools, and being vulnerable, being able to ask the questions in the room, knowing
Yeah.
that probably 5 or 6 other people that have that question. And
Sure.
my job is to make sure they leave understanding the possibilities, but also what the risks are with this
Of course.
technology as it emerges. So I lead them through a facilitated conversation on this idea that, this is not magic. There's a technology behind this, and they do a bunch of activities to kind of uncover what that is,
Mhm.
including the prompt for some of them that I actually give them.
Mhm.
And then they uncover like, oh my gosh, you got a different answer than I got. How is that? How do these things function? Right. So we go through that process, and then I kind of help them understand what the impacts could be on society and work,
Mhm.
knowing that we don't really know the answers to any of that yet, but we do know that these things are very good at tasks, very good at jobs. And we uncover some of
Right.
that. And we get into the implications for that for education. So an example there is they learn about the fact that these things are very good at basic coding, better than the human at basic coding. So what are the implications for that from a teaching and learning standpoint, and what we're preparing our kids for when they leave school? And then also, what are the implications from this technology on digital literacy because of misinformation? So we kind of unpack a bunch of this stuff, and then they learn all of that through some prompt engineering techniques that I'm teaching them, which is also very helpful for them because they sometimes don't understand that the goal here is not to treat it like Google, right?
Right.
And that
Right.
you have
Yes.
multiple questions and ask it to format in certain ways, and they get what's so that's kind of a big part of day one. The last thing we really tackle is integrity, ethics, and bias,
Mhm.
so that
Mm.
they understand that there's inherent bias built in and why it's built in and what we need to be doing about that. What academic integrity conversations need to happen, so we're not just talking about cheating, right? And what are some of
Right.
the ethical dilemmas that they might uncover in this?
Right.
Wow. Can you
It's
give us an
interesting.
example of an ethical dilemma?
Yeah, sure. So
Yeah.
I did a keynote last year, and after a student was in the audience, and she walked up to me and she said, "Thank you for doing that." She said, "My project this year is going to be to study the student's perspective on AI in the school district." I said, "That's great." She said, "But I was listening to you, and something that's come up is the fact that we're being told by teachers that if we use these tools, it's cheating. And yet teachers are openly telling us
Yeah.
that they put
Right.
our writing into these tools, and it grades it. So it's okay for them to use it, and not okay for us to use it." So that's one part of the
Yes.
ethical dilemma. Then the second part was I said to the student, well, do you care where the feedback comes from as long as you get good feedback to help you in the learning process? And her answer was very honest, which I appreciated. And her answer was, well, I don't care because I want that feedback, but other kids, they do care because
Mm.
they just see it as, don't tell me I'm cheating if what you're doing could be considered.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. I mean, it's teachers are always supposed to be models. So yes, we should use it, but students should use it, but we should all be using it as a baseline, as guidance, and then using synthesis, our own brains, to actually identify what's good, all of the risks and possibilities, as you mentioned. There's and I see that all the time when I use it myself. It's never what I want when I get a response. It's never what I want. So I have to work with other people. I have to work with myself, with other resources to actually manipulate it to get where I want. And that's a lot of critical thinking skills. Does it cut down on the time from start to finish? 1000%. Are teachers and students able to get back time? Absolutely. But I think instead of, and I have an issue with the grading component, like putting the writing in and having it graded. I think that's a great first step in feedback. And I think it's really great for, when you have 30 students in a class and you need to have conferences with each of them, you can't get through each of them in a day. Sometimes you can't get each of them in a week, but at least if they have these touch points as a first step, that's great. But I think the real benefit of it is to get time back so that you can get to the heart of teaching. You can actually conference with kids, sit with them and dialogue with them through that writing process. And now you know how they're doing this, how well they're guided through the process. And if that cheating is an issue or question, then you have this authentic form of assessment instead. Are you being able to see that as a benefit in schools? And are schools able to see that as a benefit? Getting to the heart of teaching, using AI as that benefit.
I think that's where they're going to go, right? So Julie Evans this weekend actually shared a statistic. She said on the Speak Up survey that only 7% of teachers were using this on a regular basis and 45% of kids were, right? So I do think that the nature of assessment could change, right? Because of what you just said, which is this ability to be able to give instant feedback and support. I also think these are very early on technologies. So for example, there's a lot of them that show, just put the essay in with the rubric and you get, you get a good output. My whole point is I think the teacher should score 2 or 3 of those, right? Yes. And train the machine that way so that it's scoring like the teacher, not like the LLM, right? How do we get a more personalized approach? And then what is the output so that that teacher can then use the time that they were using to score to then conference one-on-one and help the learner, through their writing journey. So if the focus was on voice, let's now sit down and say, here are some great things that you did from a voice point. Here's some opportunities where you can make that better or pull a small group. I think that's where the technology will go from an assessment that will make the learning process a lot better. But to your point earlier, will help us drive away from maybe the traditional standardized tests and allow us to provide more voice and choice in the process. The other thing I've been talking about is, you can completely change the nature of formative assessment when instead of the teacher deciding when to formatively assess you, the learner decides that.
Love it.
Now I say, give me a 5-10 question quiz. Let me see where I'm at. I do really well on that. And then I say, okay, now I'm ready for the performance assessment. It's already in the machine, load that up, continue with 3 other kids that I can collaborate with or at the same point, and away we go. Right.
And that's the path to personalized learning. And that's a head start right there, getting there.
Got it.
Yeah. I love that.
So in all of that, like that day one is exciting for people. And I always tell them when I leave, was that fun? They're like, yeah, this is great. I'm so excited. I say, you're not going to like me on day 2. And they start to laugh because
buttered them up.
Yeah, exactly. That's what you got to, honestly, there's a productive struggle that goes on when you start to unpack all the things that need to happen for you to be successful with this type of technology. that goes back to looking at your policies, guidelines, and frameworks. And that
Right.
means going back to an acceptable use policy that you may not have looked at for the last 7 or 8 years,
Yeah.
right? Looking at your academic integrity policy and updating that, creating resources for teachers so they know how to label assignments, creating things so kids know how to cite things, having a productive conversation around how do we define original work in our school district with
Yes.
AI.
Right.
Going back to your data governance policies, do you have those in place? Creating, guiding principles for AI so that you do things with integrity, right? That you're being ethical, that you're removing bias, that you're looking for transparency in the things that you bring into your system, right? Like all of these things have to be uncovered. So what I do is I really first help them kind of set a vision for where they want to be in 3 to 5 years with this. And then they work through a process with problem statements, questions, and resources that I've amassed working with all these districts. They just start building. They load everything into a spreadsheet. And then that spreadsheet walks them through a process to make sure that they get the feedback that they need to get, the sign-offs, that they know when they're going to bring this out to what constituents. And then that leads them into a document that tells the story of the school district transformational work with AI. It's all of day 2, and it's
That's
a
a lot.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes.
That's so great. I mean, it's really the heart of what is confusing, and where they are worried about their gaps are. So you're really getting them to uncover those gaps and address them. And I think that's so great. We just had Eva Mendoza on our podcast from San Antonio ISD, who's on the COSIN board. And she was saying how and actually Rich Kulata said the same thing at COSIN, basically that you have an acceptable use policy in place. You have ethics and all of those components already built in. The integrity is built in. So instead of having the policy built on a tool, which we don't typically do, we base it on the policy of the people, right? And what they're supposed to be doing. You can start there, right? Is that a good technique?
Yeah, 100%. That's why I always have them bring those first. Like the theory of action that I'm working from them is essentially don't update your policy if you don't have to. That's one. 2, be very vague because this is an emerging tech.
Right.
And 3, you can't, this is something you're going to have to look at every 6 months to a year.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that, you're covered. But, from a policy standpoint, I agree with them. Like we want to do very little on the policy side. The thing that people are missing is that it's the guidelines and frameworks and, resource that way that really is going to make the difference. But I start with the policy stuff in some places just because those guidelines and frameworks come out of the policy kind of conversations that you're having.
And it's good to level set for them. Like, you have some of this in place already. So, use it and stick to it. And I think your point is so important. I was talking to, I can't remember who it was, but, having AI focus is great, but what are we going to have in 3-5 years? So innovation is probably a better umbrella term, perhaps, because it'll encompass whatever is to come that we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so there's some of that I agree with. Some of it I push back a little bit. Like, so the reality is, like, there are some people running out right now, and they're like, "Hey, let's look at your strategic plan and where does AI fit in?" And I'm like, too soon. Like, I think the next year, which is what I get into day 3, is really around AI literacy. It's about learning, being innovative, being creative, just trying to figure kind of out what are all the possibilities, what are all the risks, so that when we start to your point, to get into, okay, this is just baked into the DNA of what we do here. It's going to be part of every learning tool, right? Every resource, blah, 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 that we have a pretty good understanding of what that means strategically. If you try to do it now, again, emerging technology, you're writing these goals that are usually 3-5 year goals. You're going to have to go back and change it next year anyway. Yeah. So, that's where I think that there has to be a little bit of a focus on AI literacy across the entire system. And that's why even from day 1, like I have HR there, I have finance in there. I've
Mhm.
got
Great.
communications in there.
Yes.
Everyone across the system walks out going, I can see how this is going to apply to the work. Right.
Right,
Right.
right.
And that's why that's important. Only other thing I'd say about day two, because this goes back to Bearish actually, was my
Mm.
early work with him. He was like, Adam, we really should focus on guiding principles. I'll be honest with you. At first I was like, I don't even know what Bearish is talking about. But then as I started doing the work, I was like, he's 100% right. So we actually built a GPT with ClassLink.
Right.
And I use that in my day two, and people love it because it walks through a process to build all their guiding principles.
Love it.
It's another really important part of the day that we do.
Oh,
That's
that's
fabulous.
great.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that. It's funny because when you talk about all of the different components with AI literacy, it's you said that's your day 3?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I heard of a district recently. I'm in New Jersey, and they just shut it all down. AI. They took it off they blocked it on the Chromebooks. They not for teachers, but for students. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's the worst thing because now they're going to be, behind the 8 ball. But then I thought, well, what? And I don't know what the reasoning was, but what if the reasoning was that they didn't have AI literacy in place and students were using it in wrong ways. So let's instead focus on the literacy component and then layer in, well, it could be at the same time, but get them to understand they shouldn't be putting PII in. They shouldn't be creating, photos that are inappropriate, all of those things. I mean, they know that, right? Because that's should be in their AUP
Right.
anyway, but right. But how do you go about that on your day 3 with your AI literacy? And do you have schools that you're working with who have shut it down for students?
Mostly I have schools that just haven't opened it yet. Right. Like,
Oh,
Gotcha.
so the school district that is in the county where I live, they do have it open, Chat GPT open for 13 and above. But
Right.
I'm working with some districts that don't even have an open for the adults yet. Right. Like, and
Oh,
I can see both sides of this. Actually, I applaud that school district. If they saw an issue and they stopped,
yeah.
my
Right.
guess is they're not shutting it down forever.
Right.
Pause. Kind
Yes.
of
right.
what New York City
Yes.
did, right? They're pausing and then they're going to address what they need to. And also they were probably ahead of the curve. Like, so going in the next school year, what you're going to see is Copilot will be, it'll be
Right.
free, 13
Right.
and above. And, so the same thing will happen with Gemini, right?
Right. Okay.
That's why I'm trying to create the sense of urgency right now to say this summer, going into the next school year, we need to have everything in place from that day 2, right? So that when we go into
Yeah.
day 3, what
Right.
we're doing is we're looking across the system. So we have plan for AI literacy for learners. We have a plan for AI literacy for teachers, for leaders, and then operations, right? Like everyone else in the school system has a plan. You also have a whole track where you're looking and continuing to update all your policies, your data
Mm-hmm.
governance, all that. And then what are you doing on the technology side from a access and infrastructure standpoint? So making sure you're updating all of your rubrics, right? So that you can evaluate these generative AI tools, making
Mm-hmm.
sure you're sending a letter out to your vendors who you work very closely with so that you know how they're updating, and are they making sure that they're taking cybersecurity and data privacy into account as they do these, looking at new and fresh things that are coming in. And is there a clause in their data privacy that they sign that says, unless we go out of business and or sold, we'll protect your data. Because if this
Right.
is a very new company that's doing that, be careful of that, right? Like
Yes.
all of that is kind of baked into the literacy that we're doing within these different groups. And it's a very simple process. I am not trying to build a strategic plan. It literally is like,
Yeah.
here are a couple of goals, right? And from those goals, here's what we might see as a model. And then what are all of the things that you need to be doing to actually achieve those goals? And then that basically they build out this template that I have. They build all that out, and that leads you into day 4, where you backwards map to the PD and the learning that needs to happen across your organization. And we start to build the things in the theory of action there is just as many on-ramps as possible
Yes. Right.
Love
to
that.
this for all these different groups. But, you know, what I came away from the AIR conference too on the AI literacy side is that we have great organizations like Digital Promise kind of looking after
Yes.
that. They have some grants. They're going to create great content for school districts. ISTE's doing some of that work as well, right? So these districts, I'm saying like, you don't have to create a bunch of stuff yet. Let's see what they're doing. We also know Common Sense is doing the parent stuff with OpenAI. So I think in the next 6 months, we're going to see a ton of content that's going to help school districts kind of this work along.
Yes. Right.
And I also think I'm hoping that this summer teachers will be able to have the time. I think that it just came on. I don't know. Teachers are just bombarded with so many other things, right? So it's hard to get excited and test and experiment. Some teachers are in it, right? But some are taking their time, and because they just haven't been able to. They're focused on other things, and so because we put so much on them, so I'm hoping that over the summer they'll really have a chance to sit back and say, all right, well, let me see maybe I can make some recipes, right? Just for like personal use, perhaps. And then, or like Jerri does, she plans her outfits when she goes away to conferences with AI. But we just do it for personal, and then they can see. And some teachers have been doing it, but as you pointed out in that survey, many have not been. And I see the same thing when I talk. So when I talk with teachers, so I'm hoping that this summer might be a good chance for them to do that. I don't know. I'm thinking they might be able to get caught up.
Yeah, I agree. I think for one thing, I really liked how you said starting personal. So that is kind of the trajectory I bring people through, which is I give them a prompt. And then the second thing that they do, I give them a bunch of scenarios where they can do whatever they want. They do something personal. A lot of them will pick like something health-wise or a trip they're taking. And then I can teach them some very specific technique. One thing that on the AI literacy front that I'm a little weary of is like all these acronyms that are out there, because first of all, these models are going to change pretty quickly. So those acronyms are going to go out of date. And you know, there's some 3 or 4 things you could teach people that if they had that in their mind and were curious, that's all they need, right? Which is like, you need to give it as much information as possible.
Right.
It needs a process, give it a process, give it a persona, right? And then give it an output. Like if that's what you think through every single time, and then say, well, I don't need that on this one, but I need it on this one, you're great. And I'm a little weary of the acronyms. We're probably going to see a lot of that in the teacher PD this summer.
Yeah.
And the only other thing I'd say is like, this has to be ongoing. So every time I do a session, so the 4 sessions I laid out, they're usually, some districts will do, day 1 and day 2 back to back, but most of the time there's time between those sessions. And every session I start with, it's what did you learn? What did I learn? And what questions do we have? Because even if it's 2 weeks, there's something new that has happened that I have to update them on.
Right.
Yes.
It's so funny because you mentioned those 3 things that are just basic for prompts, and that's not foreign to teachers. That's what they do in every single lesson. Every time they ask students to do something, those are the components that they need to provide for students in order for the students to do what is expected. So that's not foreign to them. They'll be able to handle that. No problem. Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I noticed I was reading one of your articles and I read about you saying that you come in and talk about what have you learned? What have I learned? And you said that even the people that just spent 10 minutes a day on it had a higher learning curve. That's a lot of time.
That's
it's
cool.
Not, and it's not scientific either. It's just, that's an atomism. But I'll just say what I'm trying to get people to do is work the muscle. And my point with them is like, you don't do anything between this session and the next session a month from now. Right. It's almost like starting over. So if you set aside 10 minutes every day, I just say, just grab an article, bring that in, just get curious about something in your personal life, or just do it for 10 minutes a day. You will get better at using these tools.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So when you meet with schools for 4 days, that's over how What time frame?
Yeah, it's like up in Ottawa, I met with the Ottawa Catholic School Board. They were amazing. We did it over like a month and a half period. We did all that work.
Oh, okay.
Some
Wow.
districts I've been working with, since August, and, we're only through 3 of the days. Like, just
Right.
depends on, how quickly they want to move and the work that needs to get done in between sessions.
And like
Some
you
of
said,
the,
they have a lot of things they're working on
that's
in the
right.
Yeah.
background.
Yeah.
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 There's so
So
much going on.
some of the things that I've just learned in the process is someone has to own this thing. And there is not anyone in a
Mm,
school district today whose job is generative AI. So I'm not advocating that you now have a generative AI person. I'm just saying someone has to own the plan and the process as you move through. The second thing is that the districts, they do have to meet and, complete the tasks in between.
Yes.
So a lot of the policy guidelines
yes.
and frameworks session came out of the fact that originally day 2 was creating a plan. And then between day 2 and day 3, I would check in and no work had been done.
Right.
And it was because they had to create, the guidelines and frameworks and they didn't know how. Right.
Mm.
So that's how
Yeah.
that day actually came. And it's really, so I learned a couple of valuable things. One is that follow up in between the days isn't just going to magically happen. I had to give them a lot more guidance. And
Yeah.
that B, like the foundation for all this work at the district level is that policy guidelines and frameworks work.
Nice. It seems so comprehensive. And even if it does take an entire year, they're ready. They're ready. So I love that. I love your whole setup there. Good stuff.
What advice would you give to districts that are, questioning where do we start? To call you?
Besides that.
That's what I would say.
Well, I would appreciate that. But
Yeah.
I like the best advice I could be is to start. Like
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
make sure that you're educating at that district level. I see a lot of starts that we're going to create a Canvas course for teachers, teaching them about generative AI.
Mhm.
And that's great if a teacher now knows what generative AI is, but if they don't have anything in place
Yeah.
that actually helps them then utilize it in ways that are going to be helpful to the learning process, that's not going to really scale, right? So
Right.
that's why I say, like, let's make sure that we're starting at that district level. To say you can't then have that course educating teachers as well, but so that you're kind of working on parallel tracks
Yeah.
moving forward.
Yes. And as many on-ramps, I loved that, as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Multiple
Yep.
ways to get there.
For
Absolutely.
sure.
Very good.
Yes.
I'm looking
Yeah,
forward
well,
to sharing this because schools, like they don't know
oh,
where to begin. So this is really great. And I can also see your work with consortiums, right, of different ed leaders together,
yes.
because even though they're in different districts, I like the concept of them kind of working through and comparing, and that would be a nice approach too. So
I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, I have 2 of those. So I have one, rural Virginia. We've got 10 districts that come together. The thing that I love about that is,
Mhm.
again, a lot of this, there's no roadmap. I'm just kind of making stuff up as I go along and learning. And,
Right.
but what was cool is, like, if I go into a Charlotte Mech, they could bring 30 people in a room pretty easily. You
mhm.
go in
Right.
these small rural districts,
Right,
they can do that. So
right.
the way that
Right.
I frame the day is, even though they're working on a localized version of their guidelines and frameworks or whatever, they then collaborate with another district, right? And what they
Oh, I
did
like
was they
that.
said, hey, if you develop this, we'll
Yep.
develop this and we'll
Yep.
share,
Mhm.
right?
That's what small districts have to do. They have
That's right.
to. Yeah.
Yes.
You know
I
that
love
from New Jersey for sure, right? There's a
Well,
lot,
exactly. And that's what I'm thinking. I know.
a lot
Yeah.
of small districts. So we have that. And then up in BC and British Columbia, like,
Mm.
those superintendents are amazing. They work very well together. They said, hey, let's tackle this together, right? And then
Love
we'll be able
that.
to scale this much quicker. So I'm doing that up in BC, and we hope to do a bunch more of those, because that is a good way to kind of scale and get to a lot of districts a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's great.
No,
That
you
is
have
great.
how many books?
Well, I published a couple of books, one teaching the I generation years ago, and then one on personalized learning that I think 7 people read. But I'm
I have a book like that.
I'm working on one on generative AI right now with Dr. Richard Charles, who's the CIO out in Denver Public. So we're working that book right now.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to that then.
Is AI helping you write the book?
It is, actually. I was on the plane yesterday on the way back, and I recognized pretty quickly that AI is terrible at writing a book, but it's really good at providing a framework that helps me. So
Yes.
it's actually been pretty magical, because I'm a much better writer when I have a starting point. A cursor blinking at me is very hard.
Oh, it's terrifying. It's terrifying. And we were, Guy Kawasaki is going to come on our podcast. We have another one where he was on, but we also saw him at South by Southwest EDU. And he said, AI has made me a better writer, is exactly what he said. So I think it's very interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing a bunch of better writers and students as schools start learning how to use it ethically and responsibly and with fidelity. So we'll see as time goes on. But good. Yeah. So when you finish your book, we'll have you back on.
All right. That's like a deal.
Sounds good. Thank you, Adam, for joining us today. And you gave us such a great overview of your process and what districts need to be thinking about. This is going to be a really important podcast. So we appreciate your time that you've given to us today.
Thanks for your kind words. Appreciate being here.
Thank you for listening. And if you would like to stay linked up, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube.